A gentleman came to see me last week in Los Angeles. He had been studying my teachings for 3 years, 3 years, my friend, and he said to me, Neville, I understand that I create my reality. I understand the law of assumption, but I am still struggling financially. What am I doing wrong? I looked at him and I said, You are doing nothing wrong. You are already rich. The problem is not that you haven't become wealthy. The problem is that you refuse to accept the wealth that is already yours. He stared at me as though I had lost my mind. But Neville, he said, look at my bank account, look at my circumstances. How can you say I am rich? And I told him exactly what I am going to tell you tonight. You see, this man, like most who hear me, was trying to become something he already was. He was trying to acquire what he already possessed. And that very effort, that very attempt to become rich, was the one thing preventing him from experiencing his wealth. Listen carefully, my friend. You are not poor trying to become rich. You are rich, convinced that you are poor. Tonight I want to explain what this means to you personally. You see, my friend, your financial struggles are not what you think they are. They are not the result of a bad economy. They are not the result of lack of opportunity. They are not even the result of your circumstances. Your financial struggles exist because you have accepted a false identity. You have convinced yourself that you are someone who lacks, someone who needs, someone who must work and struggle to acquire what you do not have. But I tell you, this is not who you are. The world you see around you, the bills that concern you, the bank account that disappoints you, these are not causes of your poverty. These are effects of your consciousness. And consciousness can be changed in an instant. The world is yourself pushed out, my friend. Change yourself, and you change your world. Now you may ask, but Neville, I have tried to think positively about money and it hasn't worked. Of course it hasn't, and I will tell you exactly why it hasn't worked. The world will tell you that if you think positive thoughts about money, money will come to you. I tell you they are wrong. Positive thinking is not assumption. Positive thinking keeps you in the state of need, trying to think your way to wealth. But assumption is the acceptance of wealth as a present fact. There is no effort in assumption, no striving, no trying to convince yourself. You simply accept what is already true. You cannot become what you already are. You cannot attract what you already possess. You cannot manifest what is already yours by divine right. When you try to become wealthy, you are affirming that you are not wealthy. When you try to attract money, you are declaring that money is separate from you. When you attempt to manifest abundance, you are living in the consciousness of lack. But hold this thought. There is a precise difference between the feeling of being wealthy and the emotion of excitement about wealth. Most who practice the law confuse these two completely, and this confusion destroys their success. I will explain the exact difference in just a moment, for without understanding this distinction, you cannot maintain the assumption that creates wealth. I have watched this for decades in my audiences. A man will come to me and say, I am using the law of assumption to become rich. But listen to his words, he assumes he must become rich, which means he assumes he is not rich. His very assumption contradicts his desire. He is assuming poverty while trying to demonstrate wealth. A woman will tell me, I am visualizing abundance every day, but she visualizes from the state of need. She sees abundance as something outside herself that must be brought to her. She is trying to fill an empty vessel, not recognizing that the vessel is already full. Let me tell you about a woman who wrote to me many years ago from New York. She had been studying metaphysical teachings for over 5 years. 5 years, my friend. She had read every book, attended every lecture, practiced every technique she could find. And her financial situation had only grown worse. She wrote, Dear Neville, I have tried everything. I have visualized checks in the mail. I have affirmed abundance. I have made vision boards and treasure maps. Nothing works. I am more in debt now than when I started. What am I doing wrong? I wrote back and told her she was doing nothing wrong. I told her she was simply trying to acquire something she already possessed. Stop trying to become wealthy, I wrote. Start living as the wealthy woman you are. At first she resisted this completely. She wrote back saying, How can I live as wealthy when I can barely pay my rent? How can I feel rich when my bank account is overdrawn? This makes no sense. I explained to her that wealth is not an amount in a bank account. Wealth is a state of consciousness, a state you can enter regardless of present circumstances. Begin tonight, I told her. When you retire to sleep, do not try to attract money. Simply feel yourself as naturally wealthy. Feel it as you would feel any other natural fact about yourself. She practiced this for 3 weeks. For 3 weeks, she entered sleep feeling herself as a naturally wealthy woman, not trying to become wealthy, not hoping to attract money, simply resting in the assumption that wealth was her natural state. In the 4th week, she received a call from an attorney. A relative she had never met had left her a substantial inheritance. But more than that, my friend, more than the money itself, her entire relationship with wealth had changed. She no longer felt separate from abundance. She no longer felt she had to work and struggle for every dollar. She felt, for the first time in her life, naturally prosperous. The money was simply consciousness made visible. The outer change followed the inner change, as it always must. Now watch this, my friend. This woman did not create wealth. She did not manifest abundance. She simply stopped denying what was already true. She stopped refusing her birthright. She accepted her identity as a wealthy being. And this is what I mean when I tell you that you are already rich. Wealth exists in consciousness before it appears in form. You possess it now, in this moment, as surely as you possess the ability to think these thoughts. The question is not whether you will become wealthy. The question is whether you will accept the wealth that is yours. Now I must tell you something most teachers will not. There is a specific mistake that destroys wealth consciousness the moment you make it. And 90% of those who practice the law make this mistake without knowing it. They mix the state of wealth with the state of seeking wealth, and this mixture cancels out their entire practice. I will show you exactly what this looks like and how to avoid it. But most who hear me make specific mistakes that prevent this acceptance. Let me tell you the 3 most common errors I observe. The first mistake is mixing states. A person will spend 10 minutes in the morning feeling wealthy, then spend the rest of the day worrying about money. They feel rich during meditation, then feel poor when paying bills. They assume abundance in their prayers, then assume lack in their actions. My friend, you cannot serve 2 masters. You cannot dwell in wealth consciousness part-time. Either you are wealthy or you are not. Either you live from that assumption or you do not. There is no middle ground. The second mistake is trying to figure out how wealth will come. A student will feel himself wealthy, then immediately begin planning how this wealth might manifest. He will look for opportunities, scheme about investments, worry about timing, but the moment he asks how, he has left the wealth state and entered the state of need. Now I must insist on this, my friend. Wealth knows how to express itself without your help. Consciousness knows how to externalize what it accepts as true without your interference. Your job is not to figure out the how. Your job is to maintain the assumption, stay in that state, and let it produce its natural fruits. Do not let anyone, including yourself, talk you out of this. The moment you begin planning how your wealth will come, you have declared that you do not really believe you are wealthy. The third mistake is testing whether it is working. A woman will feel herself wealthy for a few days, then check her bank account to see if anything has changed. When she sees no immediate difference, she concludes the teaching is false. But she has missed the point entirely. You do not feel wealthy to change your bank account. You feel wealthy because you are wealthy. The bank account will change because it must reflect your consciousness, but that is not why you maintain the feeling. You maintain the feeling because it is the truth about you. Make no mistake about this. You are not practicing a technique to become rich. You are accepting a fact about your nature. You are not using assumption to attract wealth. You are recognizing that assumption is how consciousness operates, and consciousness is the only reality. The technique is assumption, not positive thinking, not visualization, not affirmation, assumption. You simply assume that you are wealthy now, as a present fact, and you live from that assumption completely. How do you know what it means to assume you are wealthy? You feel it, not with your emotions, but with your inner conviction. You rest in the naturalness of being a wealthy person, just as you assume you are a man or a woman without question, without effort, without proof. You assume you are wealthy. This assumption must become as natural to you as breathing. When you think of yourself as wealthy. When you make decisions, you make them as a wealthy person would make them. When you move through your day, you move with the inner confidence that comes from financial security. But listen carefully. This is not pretending. This is not acting as if. This is recognizing what is already true in consciousness and refusing to deny it any longer. You are not trying to convince yourself of something false. You are accepting something that is eternally true. I learned this principle from my teacher Abdullah many years ago in New York. I came to him as a young man from Barbados, struggling to make ends meet, full of worry about my future. I wanted him to teach me how to attract success, how to manifest prosperity. He looked at me and said, "Neville, you are asking the wrong question. You do not need to attract success. You are success. You do not need to manifest prosperity. You are prosperity itself in human form." At first, I thought he was speaking in riddles. How could I be prosperous when I had so little money? How could I be successful when I had achieved so little in the world? But Abdullah was patient with me. He explained that success and prosperity are states of consciousness, not conditions of the world. Change your consciousness, he said, and your world must change to match it. This is law. He taught me to enter sleep each night feeling myself as the successful man I wished to be, not trying to become successful, not hoping for success, simply resting in the assumption that success was my natural state. I practiced this faithfully for months, and slowly, my friend, very slowly at first, my outer world began to reflect this inner change. Opportunities appeared, connections were made, doors opened that had been closed, not through my effort, but through the natural expression of consciousness. This is how the law operates. Assumption hardens into fact. What you assume to be true about yourself becomes true in your experience, not because you have convinced the universe to give you something, but because you have stopped denying what was always yours. Not, remember what I told you a few moments ago about the woman from New York? She stopped trying to acquire wealth and started accepting it. The same principle applies here. You must stop trying and start accepting. Even those who understand that wealth is consciousness often fail because they try to feel wealthy while maintaining the habits of poverty. They assume wealth in their minds while living in fear with their bodies. They declare abundance with their words while making decisions from lack. This will not work, my friend. Consciousness is one. You cannot assume wealth and live in poverty. You cannot feel abundant and act from lack. The assumption must be complete, or it is not assumption at all. You have heard me speak of feeling, and many have misunderstood me. Let me be plain. When I tell you to feel wealthy, I do not mean to work up an emotional state. I do not mean to get excited about money or try to manufacture enthusiasm. The feeling I speak of is the quiet inner knowing, the natural assumption that you are financially secure. It is as calm as knowing your own name, as effortless as knowing you are breathing. Do not be misled by teachers who tell you to feel grateful or feel abundant with great emotion. They have not understood what I mean by feeling. If you are wealthy in consciousness, you do not worry about money. If you are abundant by nature, you do not hoard or grasp or fear loss. If you are financially secure in your being, you do not make decisions from desperation. This does not mean you spend money foolishly. A wealthy person is wise with resources. This does not mean you ignore practical matters. A prosperous person handles affairs intelligently, but the motivation changes completely. You act from abundance, not toward it. You move from security, not toward security. You must understand that wealth consciousness is your natural inheritance. You did not come into this world to struggle and lack. You did not incarnate to worry about bills and fear the future. You came as consciousness itself, and consciousness lacks nothing. The poverty you have experienced is learned. The lack you have known is acquired. The financial struggle you have endured is the result of accepting false beliefs about your nature. But what is learned can be unlearned. What is acquired can be released. What has been accepted can be rejected. I tell you with certainty, and this is not opinion, it is law, that your consciousness of wealth is more real than the money in any bank account. Your assumption of prosperity is more substantial than any property deed. Your inner conviction of abundance is the only true wealth there is. Everything else is shadow, the play of consciousness upon itself. Before I tell you how to apply this tonight as you retire to sleep, there is one final thing about the moment just before sleep takes you. Most people lose the assumption in those final seconds when consciousness fades, and this is why their practice bears no fruit. There is a specific way to carry the assumption across that threshold, and it determines whether you wake tomorrow still convinced of your wealth or return to old patterns of lack. I must show you this technique now. Tonight, when you retire to your bed, you will begin to reclaim your birthright. You will stop pretending to be poor and start being who you are. Here is exactly what you will do. First, you will enter that drowsy state akin to sleep, that state where the conscious mind releases its grip and the subconscious becomes receptive. Second, in that state, you will assume the feeling of being wealthy now, not as something you hope for, but as something that is naturally true about you. Third, you will not strain to hold this feeling or fight to maintain it, but you will rest in it as you would rest in any comfortable chair. And fourth, you will let sleep take you while you dwell in this assumption, so that it impresses itself upon your deeper mind. Do not try to see yourself becoming wealthy. Feel yourself as wealthy now. Do not imagine the process of acquiring riches. Rest in the end result. Live in the end. Do not visualize money coming to you. Simply be the person for whom money is never a concern. What does this feel like? It feels like relief, my friend. It feels like the end of financial anxiety. It feels like the confidence that comes from knowing you are secure. It feels like the peace that passes understanding because you know that you need nothing and lack nothing. Some nights this feeling will come easily. Other nights you may struggle to find it. This is natural. Simply return to the assumption gently, the way you would return to a pleasant memory. Do not force it. Do not strive for it. Simply accept it as true and rest in that acceptance. Night after night you do this. Week after week you enter sleep in the consciousness of wealth. Month after month you dwell in this assumption until it becomes more natural to you than breathing. And slowly, surely, your outer world will conform to this inner reality. Not because you have manipulated external conditions, but because external conditions must reflect consciousness. This is not theory, my friend. This is law. Remember what I said about that gentleman who came to see me in Los Angeles? When he stopped trying to become wealthy and started living as the wealthy man he was in consciousness, his entire financial picture transformed. Within 6 months, his business had tripled its income, not through new strategies or harder work, but through the natural expression of wealth consciousness. But more important than the money was the inner change. He no longer woke up worried about finances. He no longer made decisions from fear. He had claimed his identity as a naturally prosperous being, and that identity expressed itself in every area of his life. This same transformation awaits you, my friend. Not tomorrow, not someday, but now. Tonight, as you practice what I have shared, you begin to live as the wealthy being you have always been. And now I tell you, my friend, the secret you have just heard tonight. You are not becoming wealthy. You are not attracting abundance. You are not manifesting prosperity. You are simply remembering who you are. Wealth is not something you acquire. It is something you accept. It is not a condition you achieve. It is a state you enter. And the moment you truly enter that state, the moment you dwell there completely, your world has no choice but to reflect what you have accepted as true about yourself. Wealth in sin wealth is whole. Tonight, when you retire, do this just once. Enter that drowsy state akin to sleep. Feel yourself as the wealthy being you are, not trying to become wealthy, not hoping for wealth, but resting in the naturalness of your abundance. That is all. You may wake tomorrow to find your world already changing, or you may find the assumption must be persisted in for days or weeks. Both are well, my friend, both are well. The assumption will harden into fact. It must. Remember always what I have told you. Consciousness is the only reality. The world is yourself pushed out. Nothing comes from without, all things come from within. You came into this world as consciousness itself. You possess everything you could ever desire, right now in this moment, as a fact of your being. Tonight you begin to live from this truth instead of toward it. May you sleep in the consciousness of your divine inheritance. May your assumption of wealth become as natural as breathing. May you wake tomorrow knowing yourself as you truly are. Until we meet again, my friend, may you dwell in the secret place of the Most High. In 1933, I found myself trapped in New York City with exactly 17 cents in my pocket and no way home to Barbados. No job, no prospects, no friends with money to lend. Every door I knocked on closed in my face. I was, by all reasonable measure, completely stuck. Now, most who find themselves in such circumstances do what seems natural. They struggle, they worry, they make plans and backup plans. They assume their limitation and then try to work within it. This, my friend, is precisely why they remain trapped. But I did something that seemed, even to me at the time, completely mad. I assumed I was already in Barbados while sleeping in a cold room in Manhattan. I lived in my assumption so completely that within weeks, circumstances I could never have arranged began arranging themselves. The impossible became inevitable. Tonight I will tell you exactly how I did this, because the method I used in 1933 is the same method that will free you from whatever prison you have built around yourself. But first, you must understand why everything you think you know about getting what you want is backwards. Now, my friends, what I am about to tell you changed everything I understood about the nature of reality itself. You see, when I found myself in that predicament in 1933, I did what any reasonable man would do. I looked for work. I asked friends for loans. I explored every practical avenue I could imagine. Day after day, I walked the streets of Manhattan, knocking on doors, seeking any opportunity that might provide passage home. And day after day, every door closed, every lead disappeared, hope vanished. I was becoming desperate, my friend. The little money I had was nearly gone. Winter was approaching, and I had no warm clothing suitable for a New York cold season. I had come to New York for what I thought would be a brief visit, but now I was trapped by circumstances completely beyond my control. It was in this state of desperation that I went to see my old teacher, Abdullah. I poured out my troubles to him. I explained my situation in great detail, expecting sympathy, some practical advice, or at least a kind word of encouragement. But Abdullah looked at me with those penetrating eyes of his and said simply, "You are in Barbados." I protested. I said, "Ab, I am in New York. Look around you. We are sitting in your apartment in Manhattan. I am broke. I have no ticket. I have no means to get home." And he said again, more firmly this time, "You are in Barbados." Then he turned away from me as though the conversation was finished. I was stunned, my friend. At first I thought he had misunderstood me, but Abdullah never misunderstood anything. As I walked home that evening, his words echoed in my mind. "You are in Barbados, not you will be in Barbados, or you can get to Barbados. You are in Barbados." And then slowly I began to understand what he was teaching me. He was not speaking of my physical location. He was speaking of my assumption. He was telling me that I must assume I was already where I wanted to be, not hope that someday I might get there. But understanding this principle intellectually, my friend, is not enough. I had to learn to live it. But hold this thought. There is a precise moment between making the assumption and falling asleep when most people lose the state entirely. Without recognizing that moment, you will practice this technique and wonder why nothing changes. I will show you exactly that moment in just a few minutes, for it determines whether the law works for you tonight or remains theory. That night, I went to my small room and I began to experiment with what Abdullah had told me. Instead of falling asleep thinking about my problems, instead of worrying about my circumstances, I decided to fall asleep in Barbados. I lay on my narrow bed in Manhattan and I began to imagine I was in my familiar bed in Barbados. I felt the tropical warmth on my skin instead of the New York chill. I listened for the sound of the trade winds through the palm trees instead of the noise of traffic. I breathed in the scent of frangipani instead of the city air. At first, my friend, it required great effort. My senses kept pulling me back to the reality of where I physically was. The sounds of New York would intrude. The feel of the unfamiliar bedding would remind me of my actual location. But I persisted. Night after night, I fell asleep in Barbados while my body remained in New York. I began to live from my desired state instead of from my circumstances. During the day, when thoughts of my predicament would arise, I would gently remind myself, "I am in Barbados." When I walked the streets, I walked as a man who was simply visiting New York, not as a man trapped there. The key, I discovered, was not just to think I was in Barbados, but to feel I was there. I had to generate within myself the feeling that would be mine if I truly were home. The relief, the familiarity, the sense of belonging. Feeling is the secret, my friend. Without the feeling, the assumption remains merely an intellectual exercise. Night after night I did this. But I must tell you, my friends, it was not without its challenges. There were moments of doubt, days when my circumstances seemed to mock my assumption. I would wake up in that cold room and for a moment forget my practice, feeling the full weight of my situation pressing down upon me. There were times when I wondered if I was simply deluding myself, engaging in wishful thinking while my real problems remained unsolved. The people around me certainly thought I had lost my reason. When they would ask about my plans to get home, I would speak with the confidence of a man whose passage was already arranged, though I had no such arrangements. They looked at me as though I had taken leave of my senses, but I remembered Abdullah's words, and I remembered his method. You see, my teacher had taught me that assumption, though false, if persisted in, will harden into fact. The key word here is persisted. Most people assume they're good for a day, a week, but the moment circumstances seem unchanged, they abandon their assumption and return to assuming their limitations. Now, I must insist on this, my friend. This is where most who try to apply this law fail. They assume their desire is fulfilled when they feel like it, when it is convenient, when their mood is good. But when contradictory evidence appears, when the physical world seems to mock their assumption, they abandon it in favor of assuming what they can see. Do not let anyone, including yourself, talk you out of your assumption once you have made it. The world will test you, your senses will contradict you, your friends will call you foolish. But you must persist. But I had learned from Abdullah that you must persist in your assumption regardless of what your senses tell you. The assumption must come first. The evidence follows, never the reverse. Now I must tell you something most teachers will not. There is a detail in this teaching that has been stripped from every modern interpretation of the law. Most speak of assumption as though it were positive thinking or affirmation. I will tell you that detail now, and it changes everything. Remember what I told you a few moments ago about persistence. Now, this is where you see why it matters so completely. After I had been practicing this for 3 weeks, living mentally in Barbados while physically in New York, something remarkable occurred. I received an unexpected letter from home. A distant relative had written to say that she had been thinking of me and wondered how I was faring in New York. This was unusual as we rarely corresponded. A few days later, I happened to meet on the street a man I had known briefly years before. He mentioned that he had recently met someone who had asked about me specifically. Again, this seemed an odd coincidence. Then, within the same week, I encountered a woman who had heard of my desire to return to Barbados. She mentioned that she had a friend who worked for a shipping company and he might know of opportunities for someone willing to work his passage home. Now, to most people, these would seem like fortunate coincidences, but I knew better. I recognized them as signs following my assumption. You see, my friend, when you truly live in the state of the wish fulfilled, your world begins to rearrange itself to conform to your assumption. What appear to others as lucky breaks or happy accidents are simply consciousness made visible. I followed each of these leads not desperately as I had done before, but with the quiet confidence of a man who knew his assumption must externalize. And indeed, through that chain of seemingly coincidental meetings, I was offered exactly what I needed: passage home to Barbados in exchange for light duties aboard ship. But here is what I want you to understand most clearly. These opportunities did not appear because I was a fortunate man or because I was deserving. They appeared because I had changed my fundamental assumption about myself and my situation. I had stopped assuming I was trapped and began assuming I was free. I had stopped living from my problem and began living from my solution. Now, what does this mean for you? The principle that governed my experience in 1933 is the same principle that governs every area of human experience. It is what I have called the law of assumption. Whatever you assume to be true about yourself, about others, about your circumstances, if you persist in that assumption, will harden into fact. The world will tell you that you must first see the evidence, then make the assumption. I tell you they are wrong. They have it completely backwards. They think they must wait for their circumstances to change before they will assume things are different. But this is to misunderstand completely the nature of creation. You do not wait for evidence to support your assumption creates the evidence. Consciousness is the only reality. The world you see around you is simply your consciousness pushed out, made visible. If you want to change your world, you do not start with the world. You start with your consciousness. You start with your assumption. When I assumed I was in Barbados, I was not engaging in positive thinking or wishful thinking. I was applying a fundamental law of mind. I was impressing upon my subconscious mind a new set of facts, and my subconscious mind, which is the builder of circumstances, began immediately to construct a world that corresponded to those facts. This is why feeling is so crucial to the process. Your subconscious mind responds not to your words but to your feelings. If you assume you have something but feel you lack it, the feeling will win every time. But when you can assume your desire fulfilled and feel the naturalness of that assumption, when it feels more real to you than your present circumstances, then you have successfully impressed your subconscious mind. I have told you before that imagination creates reality. But let me be more specific. Imaginal acts, when they have the feeling of reality, when they produce in you the emotions that the actual fulfillment of your desire would produce, these imaginal acts become facts in your world. So tonight, my friend, I want you to apply this very principle to whatever seems impossible in your life. Whether you desire health, wealth, love, success, or any other thing, the method is the same. You must assume you already are what you want to be, you already have what you want to have, you already experience what you want to experience. You have heard me speak of the state akin to sleep, and many have misunderstood me. Let me be plain. I do not mean you should be drowsy or half-conscious when you do this work. I mean that relaxed, receptive condition between waking and sleeping when your critical, analytical mind releases its guard and your subconscious mind becomes impressionable. In this state, your imaginal acts sink deep into consciousness and become the seeds of your future experience. Before I tell you how to apply this tonight, there is one final thing about what happens the moment you wake that determines whether any technique sticks. Most people destroy their assumption within seconds of waking by returning to their old pattern of thought. I must address that now, for it separates those who see their world respond in 2 weeks from those who never do. Tonight, when you retire, do this. First, you will enter that drowsy state akin to sleep, that relaxed condition between waking and sleeping when your conscious mind relaxes its guard and your subconscious mind becomes impressionable. Second, in that state, you will construct a simple scene which would imply the fulfillment of your desire. Make it a scene in which you would naturally find yourself if your assumption were already fact. Third, you will not strain to hold this scene, but you will gently repeat it, feeling its naturalness until it has the vivid reality of an actual experience. And fourth, you will fall asleep within this assumption, making it the last impression upon your mind before sleep claims you. Do not make the scene complicated, my friend. If you desire to be elsewhere, imagine you are there and feel the reality of being there. If you desire health, imagine a friend congratulating you on how wonderful you look and feel the pleasure of that congratulation. If you desire wealth, imagine having the money you need and feel the security and freedom that wealth would give you. But remember, you must persist in your assumption. Do not do this for one night and then abandon it when your world seems unchanged. Night after night, live in your assumption. Day by day, walk in the confidence of your assumption. Make your assumption more real to you than the evidence of your senses. And here is that moment I promised to show you. The moment you wake in the morning, before you open your eyes, before you think of your day's problems, return immediately to your assumption. Feel it real again. Do not let your first thoughts be of lack or limitation. Let your first conscious moment be spent in the state of the wish fulfilled. This, my friend, is what keeps the assumption alive throughout your day. I tell you with certainty, and this is not opinion, it is law. What you persistently assume to be true will become true in your experience. It is not a matter of belief or faith, though both may help. It is a matter of psychological law. Consciousness is the only reality, and assumption is the way consciousness creates. I tell you this from my own experience, from the experiences of countless students who have applied this law successfully, and from an understanding of the fundamental nature of mind itself. You are not a victim of circumstances, you are the creator of circumstances. The moment you truly understand this and begin to live from this understanding, your world must change to conform to your new assumption about yourself. The question is not whether this will work for you. The question is whether you will persist in the assumption long enough for it to harden into fact. Most people give up too soon. They assume they're good for a few days or weeks, but when they do not see immediate evidence, they conclude the law does not work and return to assuming their limitations. But I tell you, the law never fails. If you will persist in living in the assumption of your wish fulfilled, if you will feel it real night after night until it becomes natural to you, your world has no choice but to conform to your assumption. This is not philosophy, my friend. This is practical mysticism of the highest order. And now I tell you, my friend, the secret you have just heard is not a secret at all. It has been hiding in plain sight in every word I have spoken. The assumption, my friend, the assumption. When you assume the wish fulfilled, you do not perform a technique or practice a method. You enter a state of consciousness, and from that state, the world has no choice but to rearrange itself to match what you are assuming to be true. This is why I could sleep in Barbados while in New York. I was not pretending, I was not visualizing, I was assuming. An assumption is a state of mind. Tonight, when you retire, do this just once. Enter that drowsy state. Assume your wish is already fulfilled. Feel its naturalness. Sleep in that assumption. That is all. You may wake tomorrow to find that consciousness has begun its perfect work, or you may find that your assumption needs persistence for many nights. Both are well, my friend. Both are natural to the process. The world will try to convince you that your assumption is false. Your senses will contradict you. Your reason will protest. But remember what I have told you tonight. You are not at the mercy of circumstances. Circumstances are at the mercy of your assumptions. Consciousness is the only reality. Imagining creates reality. Assumption, though false, if persisted in, will harden into fact. May you sleep tonight in the Sabbath rest